everyone, my name is Lindsay and you're watching Lindsay Adventure, and today we are adventuring through another Bible story just like we do every single Friday. So today I'm going to tell you another story about Abraham. So far I believe we've already discussed 2 stories about Abraham and 1 story about Isaac, and today we're going to get a story about Abraham and Isaac and me, because why not? I'll throw some of my stories in there because you guys seem to enjoy that. So we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 12, 20, and 26. Yeah, so let's get straight into it and I'll explain as we go. So we're going to start in, basically, I'm going to give you some background story of around chapter 20. So what was going on there was before chapter 20, in chapter 17, we see that Abraham is 99 years old. It's like the first verse, it says it right there. After that, I don't know what was going on there. I didn't read that much. Chapter 18, God promises Abraham and Sarah that they're going to have their own baby between the 2 of them. Nobody else involved, because they had that little side thing happen with Hagar and Ishmael, and that was not the son of the promise. And yep, so their impatience kind of got them an extra person in the mix or 2, and it just didn't work out well for anyone. Everyone was crying for a while. But yeah, so chapter 18, God promises that you're going to have your own baby, and it's going to happen next year. Like this time next year, you guys are going to have your own baby. And Sarah, of course, laughs at that. She's like, no. Immediately after this, God goes and destroys Sodom and Gomorrah because they're a very, very horrible city. This light. Okay, I'll live with it a bit longer. Yeah, and so basically it's right after that Abraham and Sarah and their whole household, which is, a very wealthy bunch of people, so they have lots of cattle, lots of sheep and goats, whatever, they have to pack up their tents and they're going to move somewhere else now. So they move from sort of the central area of Israel, south central, I guess, and they move down towards the south, down towards the coast as well. So they get up and move, and they journeyed from there, so this is in chapter 20 now, and dwelt between so they journeyed from there to the south, and when it says the south in the Bible regarding this general geography, it's talking about this desert called the Negev. And so there's not a lot down there. There's no trees or anything. It's just a lot of wilderness and barrenness. So they journeyed between Kadesh and Shur and stayed in Gerar. Now Abraham said of Sarah his wife, "She is my sister." And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah because he's like, "Oh, she pretty." But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, "Indeed, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife." But Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, "Lord, will you slay a righteous nation also? Did he not say to me, 'She is my sister'? And even she herself said, 'He is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and innocence of my hands, I have done this.' But God said to him in a dream, 'Yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart. For I also withheld you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her.'" So somehow or other, God intervened in the situation, and he just didn't let Abimelech end up sleeping with Sarah, which, that's great. Great for everyone. "Now, therefore, restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet," so Abraham is a prophet, "and he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not restore her, if you choose to keep her for yourself, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours," so your whole family, and if he's the king, that means like his entire kingdom will die, basically. So Abimelech rose early in the morning, called all his servants, and told all these things in their hearing, and the men were very much afraid. And Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, "What have you done to us? How have I offended you, that you have brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? You have done deeds to me that ought not to be done." Then Abimelech said to Abraham, "What did you have in view that you have done this? What was on your mind? What were you thinking? Why would you do this? What is your motivation?" And Abraham said, because I thought, surely the fear of God is not in this place and they will kill me on account of my wife. But indeed, she is truly my sister, you know, technically. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. So he's, you know, explaining she's my half-sister. So she is my sister. I wasn't lying, really. She is also my wife, and I did neglect to say that originally, I guess. And it came to pass when God caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said to her, do this one kindness for me, that wherever we go, say about me, he is my brother. So he basically got her to lie along with him, or, you know, admit the truth in full. Then Abimelech took sheep, oxen, and male and female servants and gave them to Abraham, and he restored Sarah, his wife, to him. And Abimelech said, see, my land is before you, dwell where it pleases you, do what you want. Then to Sarah he said, behold, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver, which is like millions of bucks in these days. Indeed, this vindicates you before all who are with you and before everybody. Thus she was rebuked. So the king is like, all right, I'm giving this to your brother, since that's what you want to call him. And he gently, in a very politically astute kind of way, told her off for going along with the whole situation, while also, you know, making sure he'd done all the right things. So Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female servants. Then they bore children. For the Lord had closed up the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. So because Sarah was there, and clearly because Sarah was there, Abimelech's wife and concubines, basically his girlfriends, they couldn't actually have children. And, you know, it takes a while for children to be had, I guess, for the whole pregnancy periods and all that kind of stuff. So Sarah would have been there long enough for people to notice that all of a sudden there were no more babies being born. She wasn't there for more than a year, obviously, because it was within the space of 1 year that they received the promise that Isaac would be born, and then he was born. So in the middle of that, like less than 12 months passed, but up to probably that length of time, she would have been in this place, you know, as a potential future wife of Abimelech, and he just never got around to sleeping with her because God intervened. However he chose to do that. I don't know if he made somebody sick in the process, or just whatever circumstances prohibited that happening, but they didn't end up sleeping together, which is great. But yeah, she would have been there for long enough for people to realize, hold on a second, there are no other babies being born in this period of time. I don't know what's going on. But yeah, when she left, then there were more babies being born, which is a sign of wealth and favor of the gods in those times, basically. So that's Genesis chapter 20, and I did mention we were going to talk about Genesis chapter 12, and basically it's the same story, but immediately after God calls Abraham to leave his family and go to this, you know, land that I will show you. And so they go off to Canaan, and then there's a famine there, and then they go down to Egypt, and it's the exact same stuff going on. Abraham is scared that the people don't follow God, scared that they're going to kill him for his wife because she's really pretty, and so he's like, all right, don't tell anyone that we're married, but that we're just brother and sister. Cool? Yeah, sweet. And so Pharaoh takes Sarah, intends to marry her, doesn't get quite that far because God's like, I'm going to kill you guys. You should probably give Sarah back. And so it's the exact same thing for the exact same reasons. Basically, Abraham and Sarah have just, in both of these chapters, chapter 12 and chapter 20, God's just given them a big promise, just started taking them places, and then their fear, their humanness rises up and kind of messes things up for them a bit. Gets in their way as they try to manage the promise, manage their own lives without God's character and without God's leading in the mix. And they say and do what they want to say and do. And because of that, there are large consequences, and it's usually consequences that like, it never quite gets that bad for them. In fact, they end up getting big gifts in the end of each situation, being favored and feared and all these kind of things by the people that they're around. But the people who, like these other nations, like Egypt and the Philistines, Gera, king of Abimelech, this is Philistine territory. These people are scared of them and going, why would you do this to us? Why would you like omit the truth and make like a potential sin occur that's going to get us all struck dead? Because like, what were you thinking? And it's just because they were scared and they just didn't think about telling the truth and letting God look after them. And so in their attempts to save their own skin, they end up causing issues for the people around them. And the consequences are very broad and very public, very, very public consequences for their own personal little half-truth lie thing. So there's that to keep in mind. And now we're going to move on to the next part where we talk about Isaac. So we're going to go over to Genesis chapter 26. So little brief overview. So I told you guys we've done one video on Isaac and Rebecca. So that was chapter 24 where they got married very, very quickly. I know a lot of you guys have seen that one at least. Yeah, so after that happens, there's not a lot else that happens. There's about 35 years goes past, and Abraham gets remarried, has a bunch of other kids, sends them all away, he dies, and now, yeah, basically, we just, not a lot has happened in Isaac's life, apart from getting married so far, and now both his parents are dead. So it says in the start of chapter 26, we're probably not going to read all the way through, but we'll read a bit of it. There was a famine in the land, besides the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. So this is a different famine to the one in chapter 20. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar. So he goes back to the exact same place that this last story just happened. Then the Lord appeared to him and said, do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land of which I shall tell you. Dwell in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and your descendants I give all these lands. And I will perform the oath which I swore to Abraham your father. And I will make your descendants multiply as the stars of heaven. I will give to your descendants all these lands, and in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Because Abraham obeyed my voice, and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So Isaac dwelt in Gerar. So what we just read there was actually the exact same blessing and the exact same promises that God has already made to Abraham. And now he's transferring them onto Isaac, the next generation. Verse 7. And the men of the place asked about his wife, and he said, so this is about Isaac's wife, Rebecca. And he said, she is my sister. For he was afraid to say, she is my wife, because he thought, lest the men of the place kill me for Rebecca, because she is beautiful to behold. Now that sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? Let's keep going. Now it came to pass, when he had been there a long time, that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked through a window and saw, and there was Isaac showing endearment to Rebecca his wife. So he was flirting with her, probably kissing her. I don't know what he was doing. Some versions are a bit more explicit about what this could possibly mean, but let's just go with the G-rated part, okay? So then Abimelech called Isaac and said, quite obviously she is your wife. So how could you say she is my sister? Isaac said to him, because I said, lest I die on account of her. And Abimelech said, what is this you have done to us? One of the people might soon have lain with your wife, like slept with her. And you would have brought guilt on us. So Abimelech charged all his people saying, so he made like a public proclamation. He passed through government that particular day saying, he who touches this man, Isaac, or his wife, Rebecca, shall surely be put to death. So that's now in Philistine law. You're not allowed to touch either of these two people or you're going to die. Then Isaac, Then Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold, and the Lord blessed him. All right, so that's the end of that part of the story. Basically, what we've just seen here is a repeat of what Abraham and Sarah had done. They lied through their teeth and said that, oh, we're just brother and sister. And they at least had the excuse of actually being half siblings, okay? Now we have Isaac and Rebecca. Now, Rebecca's not saying anything here. She hasn't been kind of pulled into the lie herself. I don't even know if she would have known. Maybe it was likely that she would have known what Isaac said. Maybe she kind of just like side-eyed him and was like, what are you doing? But I'll go along with it anyway and not say a word. So Isaac is saying the exact same thing that Abraham had said about Sarah, saying, Rebecca is my sister, not that she's my wife, she's my sister. Now the thing is, Abraham and Sarah were actually half siblings, but Isaac and Rebecca were not. They were like cousins or something. I can't remember the exact configuration, but it was basically they were cousins or half, like second cousins or something like that. And yeah, they didn't have the excuse of, it's a half truth. It's just not like, it's not the entire truth, but it's partially the truth. No, he was lying through his teeth. But what he did was he just copied the same pattern that his dad had done. He wasn't probably even around. No, he wasn't even born yet for the first 2 times that it happened. And I'm sure he would have heard the stories that had happened. It's not like it was just some mystical thing of he happened to repeat that without knowing that it happened. No, he would have heard these stories that Abraham had said this about Sarah twice already. And so he follows the trend and he says it about Rebecca. Now this brings us to a very interesting discussion that we seem to have today within the Christian realm. And it is the idea of generational curses or generational ties or generational something. I feel like there's a few other terms you could throw around there, but so recently I started unpacking my bags, my emotional, mental, whatever, spiritual bags that I felt like God was compelling me to unpack. And part of this was unpacking my bags about my daddy issues, because I have some of them. Let's hope they get all unpacked and left behind forever by the end of this process. It's exciting and scary and horrible and wonderful all at the same time. So basically, my dad is not a really great guy, and he and I have a lot of similarities. And my brothers probably have a lot of these same similarities too, but they're just not on the same journey of being healed from it, like at least not as intentionally, I guess, as I am at the moment. They're choosing to completely ignore and avoid and stay away from this whole situation as far away as they possibly can, and I was in that place as they are for most of my life, I guess, until very recently. But I know that God has a calling on my life, and to get to the places where I want, where God wants to take me, there's a process of healing and unpacking and purifying and all these kind of things. And it's really important that we recognize some of the influences that have impacted our lives and process that and become healed from all these things. And so for me, for any person, our father is a huge part of our identity, where we get our identity from. Like for me, I know I just tell a lot of the same silly jokes my dad used to tell or make up, like made all these silly sayings that some are kosher, some are not. Some I have to refrain from saying because they're not what a Christian should say. But like just silly things like that, or just different ideologies, or, you know, ways of seeing the world, or and it's not just these fun little fluffy parts that I get from my dad, but we also are both very artistic. We're both very creative in the way that we think and all these different kind of things, expressive. But there's not just that either. It's also that my dad has a lot of mental health issues. Dad, if you ever watch this, it's true. You should definitely deal with that. I'll talk to you about it some other time. For those of you who are wondering, I'm actually not in a relationship with my dad at the moment. We haven't spoken to each other for quite a while. And that's a good thing. That separation right now is a really good thing for me to be able to step back and go, I have learnt a lot of things from my dad. Some of them are good, most of them are not. And because the fact that from what I've seen that most of them are not good, I need to work through each thing that I can, anything that I can identify and go, this is not great, God. I need you to come into this space and I need you to heal me from this, because there are patterns that I see between my dad and myself. And the biggest one that I've actually identified is isolation. My dad is very good at isolating himself from people, and burning bridges with people, and, you know, kind of just doing things the not so great way, and then hoping to ask forgiveness later, and it really just makes a bigger mess for himself down the track. And there's just a lot that kind of goes into this whole idea. And when I was like sort of mind mapping all the connections, all the patterns that I've seen between myself and my dad, this was the biggest one, the one that had the most to it. And it's the one that I'm working on with God at the moment of, God, help me to not isolate myself, help me to not burn bridges with people, help me to not focus on the negative points in others, which, you know, reinforces my paranoia or my thoughts about that person, or, you know, not wanting to have relationships with those people because I'm just focusing on the bad points, which is something that I've seen my dad do more than anyone else, really. And so there's a lot of, look, I'm pretty sure most people out there, this is a psychological thing, that our fathers give us this sense of identity. We, you know, take the last name just as like a ceremonial sort of thing generally. But in essence, like, we look up at our dad and we go, oh, this is our view of what life is supposed to be about. And so we take on a lot from our dads. And so for me, I've taken on a lot of not so great stuff, and now I have to give it back to God and say, God, come into these spaces, heal them, you know, rewire my neural pathways so I don't think in these same kind of patterns, so I don't behave according to those thoughts, according to those patterns. So these patterns are very real, and we see it in this story of Abraham and Isaac, how Abraham had this pattern of being scared and not trusting God and trusting his own, you know, crafty ideas of how to get him and his wife safe enough instead of flourishing. And so by doing that, they got themselves into a mess. And you know what? Even though Isaac didn't see it in person because he wasn't alive yet for each of those occasions, it was in the family, it was in the way that they kind of just did things in the stories, and he took that on and he was like, oh, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to, you know, God's just given me this promise, just like he'd given to Abraham and Sarah, and they felt like they had to hold on to it. And so Isaac's just been given the exact same promise of blessing and, you know, of abundance and all these kinds of things, that God's chosen this family and chosen Isaac now. And with this in mind, moments later, he's doing the exact same thing that his dad had done, because it was just in the pattern. It's just the way that they did things, just the way that they thought, and it needed to be broken. And I don't know if it was broken, because as we keep looking through the family line, Jacob is lying through his teeth, you know, Rebecca is helping him in the process of lying to his own dad and lying to everyone else and being lied to, and then he marries Rachel, who lies, and all these, there's a lot of lying in this family, and it's a lot of fear-based manipulation, and that's just coming through. Even though God chose this family to bring Jesus into the world eventually and to be this representative of himself and his love towards his people, there's so much that the OGs, honestly, they just stuffed stuff up so much, and they kept just doing things because they're human, obviously. They needed saving just as much as the rest of us. So even though God chose them, he loved them, he had a plan for them, they were just doing all these things, and it was just a lot of family patterns that honestly they needed to process and needed to deal with. So what I'm trying to tell you guys basically is that this happens today. It happens in my life. It's something that I'm going through, and I'm really, really hopeful that the process won't last forever, and that going through this process of healing from my daddy issues, of not just, you know, our relationship, but also the things that I've learned and taken on from his life, the stories that I've heard of the family, and all the dysfunction, all these kinds of things, and all the mentalities, all of the ideologies, all of just, yeah, the responses to life, and just all these kinds of things. I'm hoping and praying and trusting that God is going to heal me of those things and give me peace and joy and love and all those, you know, wonderful fruits of the Spirit to be a part of my life, because I will have more space in my heart for those things, because the pain and the trauma and the patterns will have been dealt with and broken down. And we know from neuroscience that you can actually, little bit by little bit, through specific processes, if you want, I can link some resources below, you can actually rewire your brain by breaking down the thought, like the protein bonds in your mind. Can't explain it off the top of my head, but basically you can do certain activities that you isolate a thought that is unhealthy and unhelpful. So for me, it would be focusing on the bad parts of other people and instead rewiring that to focusing on the good things, if I want to maintain that relationship. And yeah, rewire those neural pathways which are thick and which are like highways in your mind, and instead turn them into dirt tracks, and get the dirt tracks of the good thought and turn them into the highways that you want your thoughts to be running through. So basically, I really hope that you guys are able to be encouraged to go out and start addressing some of the issues in your own family, in your own life. Like, sit down with a piece of paper and go, these are some issues I see in my life, and I see them in the lives of my family members as well. And I think this is a pattern. Like, it might have been a few generations old that you can see. If you hear enough stories of your grandparents and great-grandparents, you might be able to see that, hey, this is just something my family does because it's just something we do and we haven't thought to stop doing it. So maybe you can be that person to stop doing that thing and to bring in more healthy and helpful and loving characteristics and activities into your life. So yeah, that's all I have for you guys today. I really hope it blesses you, and I will see you all again next Friday. Love you guys. Bye.